Carl Jung uncovered a truth that most therapists still overlook today. Narcissists aren't born cold, calculating, incapable of deep empathy. They're born the exact opposite. They're born extraordinarily sensitive. Children who feel everything with devastating intensity, who weep when they see an injured bird, who perceive micro-expressions of sadness on their mother's face, who absorb the emotional tension of a room in seconds. And then, the parents begin the massacre. Not with physical violence, but with something far more effective. The systematic punishment of sensitivity, the ridicule of empathy, the invalidation of every profound emotion the child dares to feel. And the sensitive child learns life's most toxic lesson. Sensitivity is unacceptable. Vulnerability is dangerous. Feeling deeply is deadly. So, they kill the sensitive part of themselves. And the narcissist is born. You're about to discover the exact process through which sensitive children transform into narcissistic adults. How parents destroy the feeling function, one of the 4 basic psychological functions that Jung identified. And how this psychological amputation creates the narcissistic structure that ruins relationships for decades. But first, you need to know about 2 children, both extraordinarily sensitive, both with parents who hated that sensitivity. One became a covert narcissist, incapable of deep connection for 40 years. The other became a grandiose narcissist, destroying everyone who got close. The 2 children were from the same family, siblings. Michael was 5 years old when he realized that crying was unacceptable, not because anyone said it directly, but because whenever he cried, his father disappeared, literally, got up and walked out of the room, without a word, without an explanation. Just absence as punishment. And Michael was a child who cried a lot, because he felt a lot. He cried when the neighbor's dog died, when he watched sad cartoons, when he sensed his mother's sadness. Carl Jung would call this a highly developed feeling function, the ability to perceive and respond to emotional nuances in a profound way. But for Michael's father, raised in a military family where emotions were forbidden, this was intolerable weakness. So, he tried to correct Michael with emotional absence, coldness, and literal disappearance whenever his son showed feeling. Michael was 7 years old when he stopped crying. Completely. Not because he stopped feeling, but because he learned to dissociate from the feeling at the exact moment it arose, a skill he would develop and perfect for the next 35 years. Michael's sister, Sophia, was 3 years old when she discovered another lesson. That feeling for others was ridiculous. She was playing in the park when she saw a boy fall and cry. Sophia ran to him, worried, trying to help. Sophia's mother watched from a distance, and when Sophia came back, her mother said something that would etch itself deep into the child's psyche. "You're so dramatic. Sophia, he didn't even really hurt himself. Stop exaggerating things." Sophia had demonstrated natural empathy, feeling function operating in a healthy way. But for the narcissistic mother, this activated the shadow. The mother had buried her own sensitivity decades ago, building a cold persona over the murdered sensitive self, and the shadow always attacks in others what it denies in itself. So, the mother began a systematic campaign of ridicule. Whenever Sophia demonstrated empathy, the mother invalidated, minimized, ridiculed. "Stop being so sensitive. You're too emotional. You're exaggerating again. Nobody likes people who feel too much. You need to toughen up, little girl." Sophia faced an impossible choice: genuine sensitive self, or emotional survival through maternal approval. She chose survival, as all forced children do. By 9 years old, she already exhibited a narcissistic persona, ridiculing children who cried, calling sensitive classmates babies, flaunting her ability to not care about anything. She was imitating the maternal complex, identifying with the aggressor, becoming narcissistic in order not to be destroyed by her mother's narcissism. Michael, at 12 years old, was the cold boy at school. He didn't show any emotion. Teachers thought he had a disorder. Classmates avoided him. Girls gave up quickly, but Michael felt deeply. It's just that every emotion was immediately dissociated, sent to the shadow, repressed before it reached consciousness. The programming was complete. Feeling is dangerous. Vulnerability leads to abandonment, so he built an increasingly cold, intellectualized, disconnected persona, and everyone praised him. Michael is so mature, so rational, he doesn't let emotions get to him. No one realized that they were praising the psychological death of an extraordinarily sensitive child. Sophia, at 15 years old, was a narcissist in the making, incapable of genuine empathy. She ridiculed vulnerability, manipulated classmates and boyfriends emotionally. The mother was proud. She had created a narcissistic replica of herself, transmitting the unresolved maternal complex, ensuring that the family shadow would continue to operate for decades more. Michael, at 18, chose engineering, not out of love, but out of logic disconnected from any genuine feeling. The feeling function was amputated. He made decisions based on external logic, status, social approval. Exactly how narcissists operate, without an internal center of valuation, without connection to authentic desires, just external performance based on the approval of others. He dated several times, always superficial. The girlfriends complained that he never opened up emotionally. Michael got annoyed. Why do they need so much drama? He repeated exactly the pattern of his father, punishing partners for emotional needs, disappearing emotionally. The automated paternal complex controlled every relationship, ensuring that he would never connect deeply. Sophia, at 22, worked in marketing, aggressive, competitive, ruthless with weakness. Her relationships were disasters. Boyfriends lasted a maximum of 3 months. Everyone realized that she was incapable of real empathy, manipulated emotionally, used vulnerability as a weapon. Sophia blamed the boyfriends. Too weak, too sensitive. She looked for a male version of the narcissistic mother because genuine connection would activate the shadow, and accessing the shadow would mean feeling the full pain, systematic invalidation, ridicule, psychological murder of the empathetic child. So, she maintained the narcissistic persona at all costs. It was the only defense against the buried archetypal pain. Michael, at 28, entered therapy, not by choice. His girlfriend gave him an ultimatum. Therapy or breakup? What are you feeling right now? The therapist asked in the first session. Silence for 2 minutes. Not because he was hiding, but because he genuinely didn't know. He had no access to what he felt. The feeling function was so repressed that he couldn't even identify basic emotions in his own body. I don't know. I never know. The therapist, trained in Carl Jung's methods, recognized it. Amputated feeling function, true self in the shadow. A compensatory narcissistic persona dominating. When was the last time you cried? Michael thought. 7 years old, I think. I don't really remember. 21 years, without shedding a single tear. Decades of complete emotional dissociation. It all started with a father who disappeared whenever Michael cried. Sophia, at 30, experienced a narcissistic collapse when she met someone who refused to play the narcissistic game, when she tried to manipulate him. He said, "I'm not doing that. Real talk. I'm here. Games. I'm out." He established firm boundaries, remained present even when she escalated her manipulation. This broke the pattern. Sophia expected abandonment or submission. Instead, she received firm presence, healthy boundaries, a refusal to engage in the narcissistic dynamic. And for the first time in 27 years, something started to stir in the shadow. The buried, sensitive child awakened, and with her, decades of repressed pain. Michael had been in therapy for 2 years. When it happened, the therapist asked him to feel it in his body without intellectualizing. Michael felt tension in his throat, a tightness, something wanting to come out for 23 years. "What's happening?" "I don't know, there's something here." He touched his throat. "Just stay with it, just feel it." And then, for the first time since he was 7 years old, Michael cried, deep. Convulsive sobs, 2 decades of repressed emotions, finally finding their way out. He cried for 15 minutes. When he stopped, he said, "I feel like I've just been born." Because he had. The true self, buried in the shadow at 7 years old, was resurfacing. Sophia resisted for 6 months. She continued manipulating, playing narcissistic games, trying to force her boyfriend into the familiar pattern. But he remained firm, present, refusing to abandon her or be manipulated. After an intense fight where all her tactics failed, Sophia broke down. She sat on the floor, and for the first time since she was 9 years old, felt something beyond anger or competitiveness. She felt a deep, archetypal sadness. The sadness of a child forced to kill her own sensitivity in order to survive. And she cried, not manipulative tears, but genuine crying, real vulnerability, the shadow emerging. After 27 years of repression, her boyfriend didn't try to fix it, didn't minimize it. He just sat next to her, present, witnessing the pain without trying to eliminate it. Sophia realized, for the first time, someone was validating her vulnerability instead of punishing her, exactly the opposite of what her mother did. When Sophia was 3 years old and tried to help the boy who fell, this was reparenting. The process that Carl Jung identified as essential for healing, receiving from another adult what the parents never gave, internalizing a new way of relating to one's own vulnerability. Michael, at 32, was in a process that he called discovering who I really am, not who his father wanted him to be, not the cold persona he built to survive, but the true self, buried in the shadow. He started small, allowing himself to feel sadness during movies, crying alone at home when something touched him, gradually rebuilding the connection with the amputated feeling function. And he discovered something surprising. The more he reconnected with the buried sensitivity, the less narcissistic he became. The need for external validation diminished, the capacity for genuine empathy increased. The compulsion to intellectualize everything began to recede, because Michael's narcissism was never who he was. It was just a defense, a persona built upon the wound of having his sensitivity punished with emotional abandonment by his father. And as the wound was finally seen, felt, processed, the narcissistic defense began to dissolve. Sophia had been in intensive therapy for a year, working directly with the maternal complex, recognizing how she had internalized the critical voice of her mother, who ridiculed sensitivity, and discovering that the sensitive child she had killed at 9 years old never really died. She just went into the shadow, waiting decades to finally be rescued. She started to practice something radical. When she felt the impulse to ridicule the vulnerability of others, she paused, recognized that it was her mother's voice, not hers, and consciously chose to respond differently. At first, it was mechanical, forced. She didn't feel genuine empathy. She just imitated empathetic behaviors. Because intellectually, she knew it was the right thing to do, but gradually, something changed. The empathy started to come back, not as a performance, but as a genuine feeling. The feeling function, repressed for 28 years, was finally beginning to reintegrate into consciousness, and with it, the possibility of deep connections, of real relationships, of love that wasn't manipulation in disguise. But here's something that Carl Jung observed, and that few therapists fully understand. The recovery of sensitivity is not linear. It's not simply deciding to feel again, and that's it. It's a painful process of confronting everything that was lost, everything that was sacrificed, all the decades lived in falsehood. Michael, at 33, was going through what his therapist called grief for lost time, grief for the relationships he sabotaged, for the deep connections that never happened. For the 25 years, living as a dead version of himself, and the anger, a deep anger towards his father, not just for what he did, but for what he never did, never validated, never welcomed, never allowed. This anger scared Michael, because feeling anger meant recognizing that there was injustice, that he didn't deserve the treatment he received, that an extraordinarily sensitive child was systematically destroyed by an emotionally dead father. And recognizing this meant abandoning the fantasy that Michael had sustained for decades, the fantasy that his father was right, that sensitivity was really weakness, that emotions were really problematic. Abandoning that fantasy meant seeing the complete truth, and the truth was devastating. Sophia, at 32, was confronting something even more disturbing, the possibility that she had become exactly what she hated most, a replica of her narcissistic mother. She began to review past relationships with new awareness, and what she saw horrified her. She had treated boyfriends exactly the way her mother treated her, ridiculing vulnerability, punishing sensitivity, invalidating deep emotions. She had transmitted the maternal complex to every person who got close, perpetuating the cycle of destruction of sensitivity, becoming exactly what her mother was to her. And the weight of that realization, it was almost unbearable. Carl Jung called it enantiodromia, the process by which something transforms into its opposite. The child who hated their mother's coldness becomes cold. The son who detested his father's emotional abandonment becomes emotionally absent, not through conscious choice, but through unconscious identification with the parental complex, through the automatic incorporation of the family pattern, through the generational transmission of unprocessed trauma. And the moment of realizing this is always brutal, to see with absolute clarity that you aren't who you thought you were, that you are, in a way, a continuation of the parents you swore you'd never imitate. Michael was in his therapy session, weeks after confronting his anger towards his father, when the therapist asked a devastating question. Michael, when was the last time someone was vulnerable with you and you stayed present, didn't run away, didn't intellectualize, didn't emotionally disappear, just stayed there, present in the other person's emotion? Michael tried to remember and couldn't find a single example, not one. Do you realize what you're doing? The therapist continued gently. You're repeating exactly what your father did to you, emotionally disappearing whenever someone shows vulnerability. And it was in that moment that the second great truth hit Michael. He wasn't just a victim of the paternal complex, he was also a perpetrator. He was actively transmitting the pattern to everyone around him. His ex-girlfriends didn't leave him because they were too dramatic. They left him because he was replicating the same emotional coldness his father used to destroy him. The complex hadn't just wounded Michael, it had transformed him into an agent of wounding. Sophia had her own version of this devastating insight. She was in group therapy when a participant, a 45-year-old woman, shared something about her teenage daughter. "My daughter told me yesterday that I never validate what she feels, that I always minimize her emotions, that she's afraid to be vulnerable with me." And Sophia felt something break inside, because that's exactly what her mother had done to her, and it was exactly what she was doing to everyone around her. After the session, Sophia went home and wrote a list. All the time she had ridiculed other people's vulnerability, all the time she had used phrases from her narcissistic mother, all the time she had punished sensitivity. The list was 3 pages long. And as she finished writing, Sophia realized with total horror, she wasn't different from her mother. She hadn't escaped the maternal complex. She had just internalized it so completely that she became it. The family shadow hadn't skipped a generation. It was operating perfectly through her, but it was exactly in that moment of maximum horror that something started to change, because you can't transform what you can't see. And for the first time, Sophia was seeing with complete clarity the extent of the contamination. Carl Jung talked about this, that the real psychological work only begins when you stop blaming your parents and recognize that you are the problem now, not because you chose to be, but because you unconsciously incorporated their patterns. And once you see that, you have a choice that your parents never had, because they operated completely in the unconscious. But you now have consciousness. Consciousness changes everything. Michael, at 34, started something he called emotional presence training. Whenever someone showed vulnerability, instead of automatically running away, he forced himself to stay. In the beginning, it was unbearable. Every instinct screamed to disappear, to intellectualize and to change the subject exactly as his father had taught him through years of unconscious modeling. But Michael stayed. Even when every fiber of his being wanted to flee, he stayed present in the other person's emotion, not trying to fix it, not minimizing it, just witnessing it. And something extraordinary started to happen. The feeling function, amputated at age 7, started to grow again. Not as it was in childhood, but as it could be in a conscious adult who chooses to develop what was destroyed. Michael's girlfriend noticed the change. "You're different," she said one night. "I can feel that you're really here, present, for the first time." And Michael realized she was right. For the first time in 27 years, he was genuinely present in a relationship, not performing presence, but really connected. The narcissistic persona was starting to dissolve. And the true, sensitive self, the boy who cried for injured birds, was finally able to exist again. Sophia, at 33, did something radical. She contacted 3 ex-boyfriends, not to justify herself, not to ask for another chance, but to acknowledge what she had done. "I need you to know that I see it now," she wrote to one of them. "How I ridiculed your vulnerability, how I used your emotions against you, how I was incapable of real empathy. I became my narcissistic mother without realizing it, and you didn't deserve that," 2 of them responded. One said that the acknowledgement meant more than she could imagine, that he had spent years thinking the problem was him, that he was too weak, too sensitive. "Knowing that it wasn't me," he wrote, "that it was you repeating a pattern from your mother, that changes everything. I can finally stop blaming myself." And Sophia realized something profound. Breaking the cycle wasn't just about her. It was about all the people she had hurt, about stopping the transmission of the maternal complex, about interrupting the family shadow before it contaminated another generation. She couldn't undo the damage, but she could at least name it, acknowledge it, take the burden of guilt off the victims of her narcissism. And in doing so, something inside her began to heal in a way that therapy alone never could. Michael, at 35, had an encounter with his father. He hadn't spoken to him deeply in years, always superficial conversations about the weather and work. But now, Michael had something he needed to say. "Dad, I need to talk about my childhood, about how you disappeared every time I cried, about how that taught me that sensitivity was unacceptable, about how I spent 30 years of my life emotionally dissociated because I learned that vulnerability leads to abandonment." The father was silent, and Michael saw something he had never seen before, tears in his father's eyes. "I didn't know how to do it differently," the father said finally, his voice breaking. "My father was worse. He didn't just disappear. He hit me. When I cried as a child, he'd beat me until I stopped. So I thought I was being better just by leaving the room." And Michael realized the complete truth. The paternal complex didn't start with his father. It came from generations before. Each father trying to be a little bit better than the last, but all perpetuating the same fundamental message: male sensitivity is unacceptable. "I hurt you," the father continued. "I see that now. I tried to make you strong the way my father tried with me, but I only made you cold, and I'm sorry." It was the first time the father had apologized for anything in Michael's entire life, and something inside Michael, something that had been tense for 30 years, finally began to relax. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean that what happened was acceptable, but it meant seeing the father as human, as someone also hurt, also operating from unresolved complexes, also a victim of the same familial shadow. And seeing that allowed Michael to do something his father never could: stop the transmission consciously, choose to break the cycle instead of just perpetuating it with less violence. Sophia, at 34, was pregnant and terrified. "What if I do to my child what my mother did to me?" she said in therapy, her voice trembling. "What if I can't validate his sensitivity? What if I automatically ridicule vulnerability because it's what's programmed in me?" The therapist responded with something Sophia would never forget. "The difference between you and your mother is that you're asking this question. Your mother never questioned it. She operated completely in the unconscious, but you have awareness. And awareness gives you choice. But what if awareness isn't enough? What if in the critical moment, when my child cries, the maternal complex takes over and I react automatically? Then you'll realize it. Maybe not in that second, maybe minutes or hours later, but you will realize it, and you'll be able to repair. You'll be able to say, I just did what my mother did, and that's not who I want to be. And by doing that, you break the pattern in a way that she never did. And Sophia understood. Breaking the cycle doesn't mean never making mistakes. It means having enough awareness to recognize when you make a mistake, and enough courage to repair instead of denying. 9 months later, Sophia had a daughter. And a week after the birth, the baby cried inconsolably for hours, and Sophia felt the impulse. That voice of the narcissistic mother: "Stop exaggerating. She's not really suffering. You're being dramatic." Again, but this time, Sophia recognized the voice. It wasn't hers. It was the maternal complex. It was the familial shadow trying to contaminate another generation. And Sophia chose differently. she picked up her daughter in her arms and said something her mother never said to her. "I know you're suffering. I see you. Your feelings are real. And I'm here. I won't disappear because you feel." And by saying that to her daughter, Sophia was also saying it to the 3-year-old inside of her, the child who ran to help the boy who fell, the child whose natural empathy was systematically ridiculed until it died. She was finally giving herself what she never received, and through that, ensuring that her daughter would never need to kill her own sensitivity to survive. The cycle was broken. Michael, at 36, was in a genuinely healthy relationship for the first time. And one night, after watching a particularly sad movie, Michael cried. Not because he was depressed, not because something was wrong, but simply because the movie touched him emotionally and he allowed it to happen. And his girlfriend didn't ridicule him, didn't say he was being dramatic, didn't disappear from the room like his father used to do. She just put her hand on his shoulder, present, witnessing, validating, and Michael realized something extraordinary. For the first time since he was 5 years old, his sensitivity was safe. Vulnerability didn't lead to abandonment. Feeling deeply didn't result in disappearance. He could finally be who he always was. The extraordinarily sensitive child who felt everything with devastating intensity, but now as a conscious adult, capable of choosing where and with whom to show vulnerability, capable of protecting his own sensitivity instead of assassinating it. The feeling function was finally integrated again, not just recovered, but developed, more mature, more wise, more capable than it would have been if it had never been wounded. Because Carl Jung was right about something fundamental. Our greatest wounds, when finally confronted and integrated, become our greatest strengths. Not despite the suffering, but through it. You've just seen how narcissists are created, not by obvious abuse, but by the systematic destruction of natural sensitivity, by the assassination of the feeling function, by the punishment of vulnerability and the ridicule of empathy. And you've also seen how healing is possible, not through denying what was done, but through confronting it fully, through feeling the complete pain of the wound, through rescuing from the shadow the sensitive self that was buried, through consciously choosing to break the cycle instead of perpetuating it automatically. If this video touched you, if it revealed something about your own childhood or about patterns you're repeating, there's a way to go deeper on this journey. The super thanks button down below isn't just a way to offer financial support. It's you saying this truth about how sensitivity is destroyed in childhood and how narcissism is created needs to reach more people. It's you actively participating in breaking the generational cycle. Because each video like this costs dozens of hours of research in Carl Jung, developmental psychology, and intergenerational trauma. And when you click that heart, you ensure that more people can discover that narcissism isn't who they are. It's just a defense, and defenses can be dissolved when the wound is finally seen. You're not just a spectator. You're someone who's confronting deep patterns, asking questions that most people avoid their whole lives, having the courage to look into the shadows, and that makes you part of something bigger, part of a generation that's choosing awareness instead of automatic repetition. That's breaking cycles instead of perpetuating them. That's rescuing sensitivity instead of assassinating it. Now, the final transformation you need to understand. If you were a sensitive child who learned to become cold, the way back isn't simply deciding to feel again. It's a gradual process of reconnection. First, recognize that the narcissistic coldness was a smart survival strategy. It wasn't a moral failing. It was psychological adaptation to an environment where sensitivity was punished. You did what you needed to do to survive emotionally. Second, start small. Don't try to feel everything at once. That will overwhelm the system. Start by allowing yourself micro moments of emotion, a movie that touches you, a song that makes you feel something, 2 minutes of sadness before you dissociate. Third, find someone safe, someone who won't punish your vulnerability, won't ridicule your sensitivity, won't disappear when you're feeling something. This could be a therapist, a partner, or a friend. But it needs to be someone who validates instead of invalidating. Fourth, expect the anger. As your sensitivity starts to return, anger towards those who destroyed it comes with it. Don't suppress that anger. It's legitimate. It's healthy. It's part of the process of finally recognizing that what was done to you was unfair. Fifth, practice presence. Whenever someone is vulnerable with you, force yourself to stay. Even when every instinct is screaming at you to run, staying present in the emotion of others rebuilds your own feeling function. As defined by Carl Jung. And finally, have patience. You've spent decades building narcissistic defenses. They won't dissolve in weeks. But every moment of genuine vulnerability, every time you choose to feel instead of dissociate, every instant you validate sensitivity instead of ridiculing it, is a step in the direction of your true self. The extraordinarily sensitive child you were hasn't died. They've only gone into the shadow, waiting decades to finally be rescued. And when you rescue them, you discover that narcissism was never who you are. It was just armor over a wound, and armor can be removed when it's no longer needed. Now tell me in the comments, were you a sensitive child who learned to become cold, or were you a child whose sensitivity was validated? Team destroyed sensitivity versus team protected sensitivity. Which one are you? And if it was destroyed, at what age exactly did you stop crying? Comment the number. I want to see how many here stopped at 5, 6, 7 years old. How many spent decades without a genuine tear? How many are finally starting to feel again after a lifetime of dissociation?